Listening Library presents Blood and Breath by Qurratulayn, narrated by Marchaan Francoeur and Aaron Shedlock. For Dia Reeves, whose novels were always inspiring, and let me know there was space for a writer like me. Chapter 1. Girl. There are 3 types of devils. The ones you summon for love charms and good luck. The ones you summon for ambitions and impossible dreams. And then there are the true devils. The ones that almost broke the world 300 years ago. The ones you don't summon at all.
Have you been listening to a word I've said?
My head snapped up, and I met Mrs. Thorne's suspicious, thin-lipped gaze. I wasn't sure why that saying had emerged unbidden in the forefront of my mind. My mother had always told me it every time she gave me a lesson on how to summon devils. I didn't know if it was a saying that every child learned, or if it was only said because we were Magi, and people like us weren't allowed to summon devils at all. At the breakfast table, there were only 2 plate settings, and I looked around in confusion. Where's Theo? When I first arrived at Mrs. Thorne's boarding house for respectable ladies, there had been 6 girls living here, including myself. But within 8 months, it had whittled down to 2 girls, as Mrs. Thorne found fault with the tiniest infraction. Mrs. Thorne's lips pinched even further, if that was possible.
I found a salacious jazz record in Theodore's room, and I knew it would only be a matter of time before she started keeping all sorts of company in there.
Her gaze settled upon me.
I trust you're not hiding anything in that room of yours, Evelyn?
No, Mrs. Thorne, I said into my respectable bowl of oatmeal. I just had trouble sleeping. Mrs. Thorne nodded once, though her gaze still harbored a thread of suspicion.
Good. I was beginning to wonder if there was any hope for your generation, all the wild dances you youths come up with. That's why we done will never gain the respectability necros have.
I said nothing, as Mrs. Thorne talked on. I had thought that I would be able to save up enough money within a year to get a place of my own. But with Theo gone, I would need to move faster. The other girls had shielded me from Mrs. Thorne's attention, but now I was all she had to focus on. And it was only a matter of time before she discovered that I wasn't done. I grabbed my necklace, running the green stone charm back and forth along the gold chain. It was the only thing I had left of my parents, and I wore it always. I hurried off to work before Mrs. Thorne found some excuse to do an inspection. I had more pressing issues on my mind than whether or not my room was respectable. I had picked up an extra shift at the Red Emporium, and with Theo gone, I was definitely going to need the money. As I moved away from the boarding house, the buildings in the surrounding area slowly changed from sooty homes that huddled together for warmth to new brick buildings bright with electricity. Evan Wilde, I'm so glad you could make it, the owner, Mrs. Blackwell, said as she stood outside the entrance. You poor thing. I'm getting cold just looking at you. She wrapped soft arms around me, and I wanted to lean in and never let go. But I couldn't. I couldn't afford to trust anyone. I dropped my gaze and nodded before hurrying to my station. I avoided everyone's eyes, staring down at the surface of my desk until I was sure the colors of my own eyes had steadied and wouldn't reveal what I was. The full moon was tonight. Everyone who worked at the Red Emporium was done, as were most of the customers. 30 years before, it had been illegal for anyone other than necros to call down a devil. Only necros had the knowledge and skills to do so. But now, After a growing movement for equity between the classes, done were allowed to as well. Places like the Red Emporium had popped up rapidly, fulfilling a growing demand for contracts that called down devils to perform small tasks. Contracts like those required a steady hand, an artistic flair, and a vast knowledge of devils and their duties. We were only allowed to draw contracts based on the book of known devils. It was supposed to be safer that way, but I still knew the contracts my mother taught me, which were completely different from the standard method we were to follow. Using contracts, Necros had been the first to rise up against devils hundreds of years ago. They'd freed everyone from the devil's cruel rule and banished nearly every devil back into their realm. Done were the ordinary humans they had freed and protected. And Magi, depending on the rumors, we were part devil ourselves, easily possessed and eager to corrupt and destroy the noble world the Necros had created and return everyone back to the subjugation of devils. That was the excuse Necros used to raid the community I'd lived in all those years ago. Torching homes, orange against a midnight sky, circling until my parents and I were trapped. I sat beside Jo, who also worked on contracts. She had her bobbed hair tucked behind her ears, and the tip of her tongue poked out of the corner of her mouth as she painted the fluid wave pattern of a contract for safe voyage. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Do you have anything planned for tonight?" she asked as she continued drawing her contract. It was a generic contract with a basic glyph, perfect for someone looking for simple protection before their journey. Only a few drops of a person's blood were required. Jo could make those in her sleep. "Not really," I mumbled as I unrolled my brushes, selecting one before setting the rest beside my inkstone and stick. "I plan to stay home, like I always did when the moon was full." It made the strangeness of my eyes more prominent, and people would know what that meant. "Perfect," she said. But before she could say anything more, a customer walked in, distracting her and saving me. There were 3 types of contracts. A full contract was what Vayu and a group of 100 Necros had done to save the world 300 years ago. It was the ultimate self-sacrifice. It called the best of devils, and anything was possible. It was uncommon, rarely done, and I had only witnessed it once. And for those whose ambitions seeped past the bounds of morality, there were unwilling contracts. An unwilling contract was like a full contract, except someone other than the user was the victim. Though it called the best of devils, it lacked the power of a full contract, and its scope was limited. I curled my hands into fists. Unwilling contracts had been made illegal decades ago, but that didn't stop everyone, and rumors always swirled around anyone with a suspiciously fast rise to power. The Red Emporium sold half contracts, the most common, which only required a few drops of blood and covered small tasks. In this city, I was the only Magi I knew who drew contracts. My mother had done so openly, teaching anyone who wished it, no matter how much my father grew concerned. And they'd punished her for it. I gripped the edge of the desk, the tips of my fingers turning white from the pressure. I needed to start drafting a few basic contracts and get prepared for the day, but I could barely look at the paper in front of me. Jo always drew customers. With her bright hair and cheerful personality, she could make anyone feel right at home, while she created a love charm for them and wished them the best of luck with it.
It was not that I didn't like people.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?